All right, folks, gather round. Let's talk about something most people would rather avoid, like a dentist appointment: the Federal Reserve. Imagine a giant, invisible octopus controlling the flow of money in America. That's the Fed, my friends, pulling levers and pushing buttons behind the scenes. The Fed's supposed to keep the economy stable, keep prices from going haywire, and make sure everyone who wants a job can find one. The Fed's got this fancy name, the Federal Reserve System, but everyone just calls it the Fed because, let's be honest, ain't nobody got time for the whole shebang. But here's the kicker: the Fed ain't just some government agency, it's like a weird hybrid, a Frankenstein's monster of government and private banks. And when I say calling the shots, I mean they literally control the printing presses. That's right, folks. The Fed gets to decide how much money is floating around out there. Think about that for a second. They can literally create money out of thin air. But wait, there's more. The Fed also gets to decide how much it costs to borrow that money. They raise rates, borrowing gets more expensive, and the economy slows down. They lower rates, borrowing gets cheaper, and the economy speeds up. Too much money in circulation, and suddenly, everything costs more. That's called inflation. So next time you hear someone talking about the Fed, remember, it's not just some boring government agency. So, we've established that the Fed is a big deal, right? But get this, the US actually went a crazy long time without a central bank. From 1776 to 1913, America was basically saying, "Central bank? Nah, we're good." Why so hesitant, you ask? Well, imagine a bunch of colonists who just told King George to take a hike because they were tired of being told what to do. They were all about individual liberty, and a central bank felt like, well, big brother. And let's be real, the idea of a central bank does sound kind of shady if you think about it. A bunch of bankers sitting in a room, deciding the fate of the economy? It's like something out of a conspiracy theory, but with fewer tinfoil hats. So America went through this weird on-again, off-again relationship with central banking. Now you might be wondering, hold on, if there was no central bank for so long, who was printing the money? Were they just handing out crayons and letting people draw their own bills? Well, not exactly, but it was pretty darn close. Imagine a world where every bank could print their own money. You had banks popping up left and right, each issuing their own currency. It was like a giant game of Monopoly, but with real money, or at least something that resembled real money. Now, you can probably guess that this whole system was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. And chaos is exactly what happened in 1907. The panic of 1907 hit the US like a financial earthquake, shaking the very foundations of the banking system. Banks were failing left and right, people were panicking, and the economy was in freefall. Now, in times of crisis, you need a hero, right? Well, America's hero wasn't wearing a cape or wielding a shield. He was wearing a three-piece suit and carrying a briefcase full of money. Enter J.P. Morgan, the OG financial superhero. Morgan saw the chaos unfolding and decided to take matters into his own hands. He gathered together a group of bankers, locked them in a room. No, seriously, he actually did that, and basically forced them to pony up the cash to bail out the failing banks. Morgan's plan worked, the crisis was averted, and the economy slowly began to recover. So there you have it, folks. The panic of 1907, a financial five-alarm fire that even J.P. Morgan, the ultimate Wall Street firefighter, could barely contain. This whole debacle made America realize that maybe, just maybe, this whole no central bank thing wasn't such a hot idea after all. Cue dramatic music and a montage of intense congressional debates because in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, and the Federal Reserve, in all its glory, was officially born. The result? A system that, let's be honest, nobody really understood at first. But hey, at least we had a central bank, right? No more Wild West of banking, no more every bank for themselves. It was like the Wild West had suddenly gotten itself a sheriff, and for once, everyone was kind of relieved to see him. Now, the Fed isn't just some monolithic entity sitting in Washington, D.C., throwing its weight around. Imagine a giant pizza, but instead of pepperoni and cheese, it's divided into 12 slices of financial power. That's right, folks. The Fed is made up of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, each representing a different part of the country. We're talking New York, San Francisco, Chicago, you name it, each with its own president and board of directors. It's like the Avengers, but instead of saving the world from aliens, they're trying to keep the economy from imploding. The idea was to have each regional bank represent the needs of its district, like a financial spokesperson for the little guy. Section 3. Meet the FOMC, the Fed's all-star decision makers. Now, out of these 12 banks, there's one group that really calls the shots, the Federal Open Market Committee, or FOMC for short. This is the big leagues, folks, the group that decides whether interest rates go up, down, or do the hokey pokey. They meet 8 times a year, and trust me, their meetings are about as exciting as watching paint dry. The FOMC has 12 members, 7 governors appointed by the president of the New York Fed, because hey, New York, and 4 other regional bank presidents who rotate on and off the committee like a financial game of musical chairs. Now, within the FOMC, you've got 2 main camps, the Doves and the Hawks, and then, of course, you've got the poor Fed chair stuck in the middle trying to keep everyone happy. Section 1. The Fed's balancing act juggling prices, jobs, and the stock market. So we've got this powerful group, the FOMC, deciding interest rates and basically steering the entire US economy. But what are they aiming for? What's the finish line in this crazy economic marathon? Well, the Fed's got 2 main goals, stable prices and maximum employment. Think of it like this. They want you to be able to buy a gallon of milk without needing a second mortgage, and they want you to be able to afford that gallon of milk because you've got a job. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's the catch. There's this third ball they're secretly juggling, the stock market. Now, the Fed will never admit it outright because that would be like a magician revealing their secrets. So the Fed's stuck in this awkward dance, trying to balance the needs of the real economy with the whims of Wall Street. Section 2, the stock market's sugar daddy, how the Fed unintentionally fuels Wall Street's casino. And here's the thing about the stock market, it's basically a giant casino. But instead of slot machines and roulette wheels, it's got stocks, bonds, and derivatives. And guess who's been known to slip Wall Street a few extra chips every now and then? You guessed it, the Fed. Now, I'm not saying the Fed's intentionally trying to turn Wall Street into a playground for the ultra-wealthy, but their actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences involve making rich people even richer. See, when the Fed lowers interest rates, it makes it cheaper for companies to borrow money. Speaking of the music stopping, remember the 2008 financial crisis? Yeah, that was not a good time. The economy was in free fall, banks were dropping like flies, and everyone was running around like chickens with their heads cut off. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train was the global economy, and everyone was strapped to the tracks. The Fed knew they had to do something drastic, something they'd never done before. So they took a deep breath, said, "Hold my beer," and unleashed their secret weapon quantitative easing, or QE for short. Now, QE is a fancy way of saying the Fed printed a whole lot of money and used it to buy up bonds like a sugar-crazed kid in a candy store. We're talking trillions of dollars here, folks, enough to make your head spin. And guess what? It kind of worked. The economy stabilized, the stock market rebounded, and everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief. It was like the Fed had performed CPR on the economy and brought it back from the brink. But here's the thing about QE. It's like giving an energy drink to someone who's already jittery. Sure, it might give them a temporary boost, but it's not exactly a long-term solution. And like any good energy drink, it eventually wears off, leaving you feeling even more drained than before. And that brings us to the present day, where the economy is like a car that's been running on fumes for way too long. Inflation is rearing its ugly head, interest rates are rising, and the Fed's stuck playing a game of chicken with the economy. They need to slow things down without slamming on the brakes and sending us all through the windshield. The problem is, the Fed's been playing this game for so long, they're not even sure what the rules are anymore. They keep trying to predict the future, but it's like trying to predict the weather in a hurricane. Good luck with that. And meanwhile, the rest of us are just along for the ride, holding on for dear life and hoping for the best. So, there you have it, folks. Okay, so you're probably thinking, this Fed thing sounds like a bunch of people winging it with the entire economy. Well, not exactly. It's more like they're winging it with a really, really thick instruction manual. And one of the chapters in that manual, the Beige Book, yeah, I know, it sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, but trust me, this thing's got more drama than a reality TV show. It's a collection of reports from all those regional banks filled with juicy details about what's going on in different parts of the country. From spending at the mall to business hiring, all in one big beige document. And the Fed gobbles this stuff up like it's the last slice of pizza at a party. So the Fed's got its Beige Book, mountains of data, and a team of economists thinking about money all day. But can they actually predict the future? That's the million-dollar question. Or should I say, the trillion-dollar question. The truth is, the Fed's about as good at predicting the future as the rest of us. Remember the 2008 financial crisis? They didn't see that coming, and neither did most of Wall Street. But hey, you can't blame them for trying. They hold big meetings, pore over data, and maybe consult a magic 8-ball. They're like financial fortune tellers, reading interest rates and inflation reports. Sometimes they get it right. They raise rates at the right time, lower them when needed, and everyone's happy. But it doesn't always go according to plan. The economy is a fickle beast, easily spooked by things like a global pandemic or a war in Europe. Who could have predicted that? Now here's where things get wild. The Fed's decisions don't just affect the US economy. They send ripples throughout the entire global financial system. The US dollar is like the Beyoncé of currencies. Everyone knows it, everyone wants it, and when it makes a move, everyone else pays attention. When the Fed raises interest rates, money floods back to the US, and that can be a problem for countries that rely on foreign investment. When the Fed lowers rates, money starts floating around looking for a new place to land. Sometimes it's a good thing, but other times it can lead to bubbles and instability. That's the price of being the world's biggest economy and having the world's most popular currency. Remember all that money the Fed pumped into the economy during those quantitative easing parties? Well, it turns out those parties can't last forever. By 2022, the hangover hit, and it hit hard. Inflation, that grumpy old dragon the Fed had been trying to keep asleep, decided to wake up, and it was hangry. Suddenly, prices for everything were going up faster than a rocket on launch day. Remember that gallon of milk we talked about earlier? Yeah, that was starting to cost more than a gallon of gasoline, which is saying something. People were freaking out, politicians were pointing fingers, and the Fed was left holding the bag, looking like they'd just been caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Now, inflation's a tricky beast. A little bit of inflation is normal, even healthy. It's like the economy's way of stretching its legs, keeping things moving and grooving. But too much inflation, and suddenly, it's like the economy's doing the Macarena at a funeral. Wildly inappropriate and a little bit terrifying. And in 2022, the Macarena was in full swing. The Fed had to do something, anything, to get things under control before the entire dance floor collapsed. So what do you do when the economy's overheating and inflation's doing the Macarena on the table? Well, you slam on the brakes, which is exactly what the Fed did. They started hiking interest rates faster than a squirrel on a caffeine bender, hoping to cool things down before the whole engine blew a gasket. Now remember how we talked about the US dollar being the Beyoncé of currencies? Well, when Beyoncé sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. And that's pretty much what happened when the Fed started raising rates. Suddenly, money from all over the globe came rushing back to the US, like it was the last lifeboat on the Titanic. This caused all sorts of chaos in the global economy. Currencies crashed, stock markets plunged, and countries that owed money in US dollars were suddenly in a really tight spot, like that friend who keeps forgetting their wallet every time you go out to eat. It was a mess, a global financial food fight with everyone scrambling for cover. And in the middle of it all was the Fed, trying to look calm and collected while secretly wondering if they just accidentally started World War III, the financial edition. So here we are, folks, at the edge of the unknown. The Fed's been playing this game of economic whack-a-mole for over a century, and it's anyone's guess what happens next. Will they manage to tame inflation without crashing the economy? Will the stock market ever stop acting like a drama queen? And will that gallon of milk ever be affordable again? The truth is, nobody really knows. The economy's a complex beast, influenced by a million different factors, from global pandemics to TikTok trends. The Fed's trying its best to steer the ship, but they're doing it in the middle of a hurricane, with a blindfold on and using a map they found in a cereal box. But hey, that's the fun of it, right? The Fed's like that friend who's always down for an adventure, even if it means jumping out of a perfectly good airplane without a parachute. Sometimes they stick the landing, sometimes they crash and burn. But one thing's for sure, it's never boring. So buckle up, Buttercup, because the ride's just getting started. So there you have it, folks. The Federal Reserve, a mysterious, powerful institution that plays a bigger role in your life than you realize. It's like that friend who always seems to be pulling strings behind the scenes. We've talked about their history, their power, their successes and their failures, their love-hate relationship with the stock market, their attempts to control inflation, and their ability to make the world dance to their tune. But at the end of the day, the Fed is just people trying to make the best decisions. Are they always right? Nope. Do they make mistakes? Absolutely. But they're trying to keep this crazy economic ship afloat. So next time you hear about the Fed, pay attention, ask questions, because their decisions affect all of us, whether we like it or not. And who knows, maybe one day you'll be the one sitting in that room. Until then, just remember, don't fight the Fed unless you're prepared for a wild ride.